Welcome back to our final panel of the day. We have some great panelists with us right now. I can see them in my screen. First of all, John Duckworth. Hello, John.
Good afternoon, Lindy.
Great to see you there. John is the Director of Network Strategy at Cadent Gas. Great to have you with us. Next up, we have Doug Whitfield. Hello, Doug.
Hello, good afternoon.
Great to see you there too. And a comfy sofa, I hope. Doug is the Operations Director at Southeast Water. Great to see you there. Guy Jefferson, thirdly, is joining us too. Hi, Guy.
Hi, Lyndon.
Great to see you. Guy is the Customer Services Director at SP Energy Networks. So we have lots to cover, and I'm sure you have your own questions and comments for us as you have throughout the morning. So put them to our panel today. You can send them through using the live Q&A field on your screen. That's just to the right of us, and we'll get to them as many as we can towards the end of our discussion. So get involved, and you will be the last person in our room driving the last part of the conversation. Okay. Look, most of us are well aware that technology can revolutionize incident response for utilities networks. That could be in monitoring for critical repairs or using drones for remote inspections, almost anything, digital twins to life cycle modeling, of course. But now, with more vulnerable consumers than ever before, it's really important that networks' incident responses are ready to go and fit for the jobs ahead. So maybe I'll start off with Guy. How important are decision-making procedures at times of crisis? How important have they been recently?
Well, obviously they're very important, Lyndon, which is the obvious answer, but I guess as critical infrastructure providers, it's important that we have exercise plans for every eventuality.
Yeah.
For example, we obviously had an exercise pandemic plan, which was fortunate given what's just happened. Never had to use it before, but we had it exercised, so we're able to go very quickly, and it's the same with a storm or anything like that. It's an emergency situation.
Yeah,
it's important because it's important that people know their role. You move into that command and control process. You're very clear in terms of the communication channels you have and how you're going to communicate. You've got checklists up and running, so you can run through the basics very quickly, and everybody knows what those basic checkpoints are.
Yeah.
And you can establish interfaces with key stakeholders, and that allows you to make decisions quickly with the best available information. So, yeah, as a critical infrastructure provider, it's vital that we have those procedures for every eventuality.
You're completely within your rights to answer that question with extremely. They're extremely important. The question is how you make that happen. John, recently, unexpected and large scale changes of we've all experienced them. How have these decision-making processes that were there already and designed for different occasions, how have they reacted and responded to the situation in your experience, John?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Guy says, I think all infrastructure providers have well set out and rehearsed incident response structures.
Yeah.
For ourselves, we operate on a emergency services protocol with gold, silver and bronze command structures in place. Typically, we would use those in a loss of supply or maybe a gas escape type incident. But actually, it's a structure that works well. It allows you to interface with government. It allows you to interface with other organisations very quickly. So it sets up that management system that you need for dealing with a reactive crisis situation. I think what's interesting about COVID is most of these incidents, certainly that I've managed, have gone on for maybe hours, days, possibly a week. 100 days into this now. And I think it's now starting to move back to be almost business as usual. And the risk there is that a lot of the disciplines that you have around an incident, and in particular the speed of response, starts to get dulled if you slip back into business as usual.
Yeah.
Kind of swing back into your normal operating culture.
Doug, I mean, that's covered a lot, Doug, but in some ways, incident response is a mindset. It's the training. Yes, you have the gold, silver, bronze response units. That's, well worn and incredibly effective. But, John just said it, and I've said it before today, from the adrenaline phase to the stamina phase, you need a slightly different way of working from here on in, I guess, because it won't be the end of trouble for some customers. The incidents will continue, and of course people will find it potentially more difficult to pay for a while.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think that's the decision-making procedures that are equally important as you go through that phase, because I think in the early stage, I think they're really important to give the people that are involved in those very quick early decisions the confidence that they can follow the procedures through, and the confidence that they've got support for the decisions that they do make. And you are right, it's now evolving into a much longer term incident where the decisions you're making are just as important, but they're probably not as quick. You've got time to think about them, but you do need to adopt that same mindset. And you're right, it's understanding the longer term impacts, which is certainly what we're starting to look at now.
Yeah, John, what does company culture have to play? There's so much going on at the moment, and people are still working in their own locations a lot of the time. Decision making has, and we've talked about it earlier on today. Decision making depends on clear communication and and obviously following procedures, but much more than that. That you work together even from remote locations. How has the culture suffered or thrived?
I think it's been a bit of a mixed bag, actually. So I think culture really is important. It's those shared values, attitudes, beliefs that drive decision making.
Yeah.
And I think the risk is that we see it in quite a polarized view. Culture being at either one extreme where it's collective, a lot of analysis, kind of centralized, gets a lot of buy-in, but can be quite slow. Whereas at the other extreme, fast, a lot of decision making delegated down, to the front line, not a lot of referring upwards, clear accountability with individuals. The reality is most companies aren't at either of those extremes. They're somewhere in the middle on a spectrum. What I can say, though, is that at times of incident, actually the culture always shifts one way, and that is towards faster, pacier decision making by necessity. That could actually be very exciting. It could be very invigorating. It could also be quite scary, actually, if that's a shift away from the normal operating model that people are used to operating in. Certainly within our company, I think we're really trying to identify the good things that are coming out of this pandemic in terms of what we're learning from a dreadful situation, but we are learning to use some of the technology better. We're finding improved ways of working. Some of the norms that we've worked on for years and years, we're finding actually we can shift from that.
Yeah.
And we're really clear that we want to come out of this stronger than we went in, keep the good stuff, and not return to the previous ways of working where it doesn't have value.
Guy, you touched on it just briefly. Guy, you touched on the command and control aspect of this, and that is rightly so the traditional way of dealing with incidents. From the top down with well-worn procedures, well-trained procedures. At the moment, as we move into a new phase of this incident, I suppose the feedback from the staff moving back up, the information you get back up to command and control, is also really, really important. The interplay of that information. How's that working, do you think, or how should that be working to make that information process, healthy?
So I think just referring back to what John talked about there, we're in a stage now where we are collecting that information from our employees. So we're using the technology at our disposal to have virtual meetings with groups of staff and pull together what they've learned as well as what we've learned. Pull it into a potential plan for when we move into the new norm. What's good for us in terms of our business, but quid pro quo, what's good for our employees.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in if we make the environment right, then we'll get the best out of our employees. So I absolutely agree, it's a two-way street. So we have an opportunity at the moment while we're coming out of that kind of the path out of lockdown to start collecting information. So when we reach that point where we're hopefully at an end of this situation, we're ready to move into the new normal, which will be a mix of the technologies and the working practices that we've been forced into, if you like, at the start of this, but the ones that really work for us, and how do we adjust those in order to make it more efficient in terms of some of the collaboration. Some of the collaboration is quite difficult with doing virtually. It's possible, but it could be better if we were together occasionally. So how do we feed that back in without losing what we've gained over the last 10 to 12 weeks?
Yeah.
So very much top down, bottom up.
I appreciate that. That's really interesting. Listen, we'll do as we've done all day today. Apply the technology to these situations because they're very human situations. The culture is really important. But Doug, can you just tell us a little bit about digital twins and how they might be able to help?
Yeah, I think digital twins are certainly in the water industry quite a new technology. And while we haven't employed them in any sort of serious effort yet, it's certainly something we're looking at going forward. And I think I know other water companies around us where they're building a new treatment plant or sewage treatment plant. If it's got very complex processes that are very different to what's been used before, having a digital twin there can be really powerful, because it enables you to trial incidents and events and trial when things go wrong without having to do it in reality. And I think they're going to become increasingly more important as time goes on. And I really hope they almost become an automatic part of any new asset delivery project. I think what's more of a challenge with them is applying that principle to existing assets or older assets, where it's much more difficult to sort of build that digital twin from scratch, because there's so many interdependencies with other parts of your systems. Yeah. So yeah, I think they're an important tool that's only going to become more so going forward.
Yeah. Guy, back to you. Case studies, people who've been doing it really well. Have you seen examples, and I'm sure in your own organization there are examples of really agile decision making that's been perhaps surprising, because a lot of people in different industries are surprised by how amazing their staff have been in the short term to keep their business going, to keep customers served.
Yeah, I memean, interestingly, one of the things that Sheesh was talking about, we've actually deployed during this period to manage on site, in particular, the dangers around COVID-19. So, you know, as a utility, we have to access domestic premises, you know, in fault situations where we have to go in because customers are off supply potentially. But we try and avoid that as much as possible. And one way of doing that is by using video technology. So we were using the technology that Ashish was talking about, but very much on a planned basis for avoiding site visits for connection jobs and to assess costs and quotes for those jobs. But we decided very quickly that it was a great opportunity to innovate here and take that technology and move it into real-time fault situations and minimize the number of times our staff have to go to a domestic premise, whether there's a COVID-19 issue there or not. It puts minds at rest of both the customer and their employee, that they're not putting themselves in unnecessary danger. So very much as Ashish talked about, we send a link to the customer on their mobile phone. They press on the link and the video is enabled on their phone, and they're able to show us their issue. We can check simple things like they've got their microcircuit breakers haven't operated, and it's just an internal issue in the house, electricity issue, to save one of our guys actually going out and assessing on site. And that's worked really well. We've avoided a number of unnecessary visits, which actually benefits us because we've saved some money as well. We haven't had some abortive visits. So again, it's demonstrated. It's just demonstrated that out of using this technology for one purpose, and we've actually realised there's another business benefit there, which actually has pound signs behind it, which is always nice. Yeah. So it's been really useful.
John, what do you think in terms of the use of technology to? I mean, this is a great example of assessing potential repairs, but again, you know, for critical repairs, I mean, potentially large-scale repairs. What sort of technologies do you favour, or approaches do you favour to using tech better?
So I think technology is helping us to make those judgments around repairs, but I think it's still very much at the stage of being guidance for wise people. It's not making the decision, but it's another input to our professional engineers. So to give you an example, we have an app now that uses machine learning to judge the level of corrosion on the pipeline. So we've fed the machine with thousands of pictures of corrosion, which we've already classified as insignificant, minor, major, severe. And the machine's learned for itself to classify corrosion on pipelines. When we go out to look at a pipeline, we still send a highly experienced professional engineer, but they've got the app with them. It effectively gives them a second opinion, confirms their thinking. But it's still the engineer's judgment. I think we are getting to that tipping point now. As we feed the machine more information, it will get better and better. It's going to be interesting when we get to that tipping point about actually, do we trust the machine now to make a better decision than the engineer? And it's just getting that balance right. But say it's there for the guidance of good engineers. It doesn't at this stage kind of give you the answer.
Doug, just staying with this for a second. I mean, it's interesting. I've worked with the NHS for a lot of the years, and their diagnosis procedures often use a bit of AI involved. I mean, there is often site testing of, say, samples that potentially are cancerous. But it's very similar to corrosion. There are certain signs, there are certain patterns that you can derive. But you still do need the human touch. There still needs to be a discerning human somewhere in the process. How do you see the development of these technologies? Do you think they're very useful, but I suppose you still have to really examine what you're using them for, what the reason you're using them for is, what the outcome's supposed to be.
I completely agree, and I totally agree with what John was just saying, is that they are absolutely becoming very useful and very important tools. And a couple of examples for us recently is that we use demand forecasting tools, and we use modeling tools to model the impact of those demands. And more for normal scenarios, they are very increasingly accurate. But when we came into the COVID period with the different people staying at home during lockdown and water use changing, we found that suddenly those demand forecasting models were not as accurate as they are. Suddenly they would, and you have to then rely more on human intervention. And likewise, when we saw the high demands that were not what was forecast, the models that predicted how our system would react were not quite right. And we were still managing to outperform those models and maintain supplies in areas where the model was predicting you would struggle. So it is a case of keeping to put that information in there. And I think more and more they will become useful, but the extreme scenarios, which is almost when you need them most, unless you've been through that exact scenario before, they will struggle to predict exactly what. So when I agree, I think there will be a tipping point, and I'd agree with John, we are maybe approaching it, but we're certainly not at that point yet, I think.
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of AI, experts, people working in the various industries around that recently, and nobody's saying that there's an all-pervasive AI that's going to forecast and understand every single situation, but it can be tailored and it can be used for certain situations that are very, very useful. One of the situations would be, we talked about it earlier, Guy, was about workforce, about the scheduling, about productivity and stuff like that. What do you think in terms of technology, the strategies could be to keep the workforce, happy, healthy, and working well?
So I think all of the utility companies have worked quite hard on productivity analysis for their field teams. I'm sure we've all got scheduling tools, and we've now got SAP with a scheduling front end on it, which allows us to take jobs right through from design, unit costing, right through to putting the right resources on to match the costing of the job that we put together, and then follow those teams through tracking to make sure that travel times, etc., are optimized, and we're dispatching those jobs as quickly or dynamically as possible to make sure we're getting as much productivity. I think the challenge we've had in our face during the COVID-19 experience is how do we do that for our back office as effectively? My team, for example, do desktop quotations for connections. I mentioned that already. How do we make sure that they're as productive as they can be? How do we monitor them at home to make sure that productivity is as optimized as possible? And we do have measurement tools now in place where we can get a good view of how many quotes are being done per day. We can get a good view of how many interactions with the customers. We've got good workflows that are coming through every couple of hours, so we can see how that job's progressing through the various stage gates. So again, it took something like COVID-19 to trust some of these systems, that they would give us the key indicators, so we would know that jobs were flowing properly and we were going to hit our targets. But again, just being pushed into the situation where you're almost doing a pilot with everyone has pushed us forward, probably, I would say, advanced us at least 12 months in terms of actually trialing the thing properly and getting confidence in it and tweaking it where appropriate.
John, it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose what's been remarkable, one of the things that's been very remarkable about this, the crisis we've been through, situation we're in, is how people have really stood up to the block and really got involved and worked really hard and made things, pushed through the barriers that they felt. But, you would have imagined, I suppose, there would have been stress fractures that would have, opened up. But actually, has the use of technology, has the way that we are able to work remotely, has that actually, been, has it been the right time, if you like, to be able to do this stuff? Has it accelerated what you were doing already in terms of digital transformation? Has it, were we in some ways fortunate that this happened right now rather than say 2 years ago?
I don't think I'd say we were fortunate. This is
delicate wording at all times.
But there's a great example. I mean, we introduced Teams, Microsoft Teams, into our business at the beginning of this year, and I'll put my hands up. It was there. Did I use it? No. it's actually been an absolute godsend to working through this pandemic. One thing I will say though is there's a risk that we think we're all in the same boat here. We're not. We're all in the same storm, but actually we're all in very individual boats, dealing with this the way that we can. And I think Teams has worked really well, video conferencing in some areas, but I think we're now starting to see some of the downsides of it. I think Guy referred to the fact that there are occasions where it's good to get teams together. It's good to get the social interaction if you're trying to do some strategic work. It's good to get up on the whiteboard, and Teams video conferencing doesn't do that. I think the second thing is some people are finding this very intense, actually.
Yeah.
People are finding it quite fatiguing, being on video, being on the computer all day. And certainly we've been acutely aware of individuals' health and well-being, and their particular circumstances may mean that the right thing is for that person is better off in an office environment, actually. So I think, it's not kind of one size fits all.
No.
I think it's having a better tool set now that we can adapt and be flexible for individual people's needs.
I suppose that's right, isn't it? I mean, fortunate is not the word, I don't mean it to be a positive really, but it's actually just the enlightening, the things we've learned is actually that it is possible to do this, but it's also exposed those difficulties. And now probably for the first time, you can actually see clearly which roles are able to do this and which, and how the business works and functions on an individual level. And let's just go to a wider scope for a second, Doug, and talk about drones. How have you started using drones more often for remote inspections? Has that been something that's been useful to you?
Yes, we have, and they've been very useful. I mean, we have obviously as a water company have a number of assets that need regular inspections, be they below ground boreholes or adits that are part of the supplies, or storage reservoirs and towers. And yes, we've been starting to use drones more and more over the last 2 years, I would say, to complete some of those inspections. And some of those are the simple external inspections that just save us doing our regular checks on some difficult to access sites. But some of the more interesting ones have been where we've actually been able to use new technologies to do internal inspections of a reservoir while it's still in supply through a submersible drone for a reservoir that's difficult to take out, and particularly for boreholes and adits, where in the past these assets are 100 years old in some examples, and in the past people have gone into the adits, and we can still do that, but there's a lot of health and safety restrictions and concerns around that. And they really freed us up to be able to, they don't replace that full inspection, but if you're struggling to find a way of taking the asset out of supply, it certainly gives you more information and enables you to do more targeted inspections when you need to. So yes, they've been really useful for us, and I think they'll continue to get more useful as the technology changes. We haven't really used them yet for internal inspections of mains, but I know there's technology out there that you can, almost with a main still in supply above a certain size, use technology to inspect those. So yes, it's a really important tool for us.
Are you all confident, do you think, that that what you've learned is going to stand you in good stead in the next few months? I mean, we have to look not always strategically, but much more in terms of operations for the next few months. John, first of all, is the confidence in decision making strong? It needs to be fast, obviously, as well, but you have to balance that together. Are you confident that what you've learned is going to be actually very constructive for the way the business develops from now on?
Yes, I am actually. I think one of the key things is that people look to their leaders to make a decision. It's very rare that in a crisis situation, kicking that decision down the road actually helps at all. So I think we have, we've been quite bold. We've made decisions when we've needed to make decisions, and we've put a lot of effort into communicating with our workforce, but also communicating with our customers. We only work in the communities with the support of our customers. So we put a lot of extra effort into understanding customer sentiment at any one time. Are they happy with us working in the streets, working in the houses, and spending a lot more time talking to them, to get them comfortable. We've got radio campaigns, we've got out on the streets, knocking on doors. So on that basis, I think we've actually really understood where we make a difference, where those key touch points are, and where we need to put our efforts going forward. So yes, I am confident.
Yeah, let's stay with that until we go to audience questions on customer communication. Look, Guy and then Doug. Guy, this all comes from customers. Many have become vulnerable or been classed as vulnerable and have felt the pinch and will feel the pinch. There is a lot more communicating to be done, Guy. So in terms of decision making, is it important right now more than ever to put customers at the front of that decision making so that response is quick, but also better communication means you have more information, you have a better conversation, when things are coming, perhaps before they do come. How important is that relationship?
Yeah, in situations like these, all customers become vulnerable at some point. So you need to be a lot more proactive. And we're now talking to customers, 8 weeks before a planned outage, for example, just first of all, so we understand their vulnerabilities, and then they understand exactly what we're going to do, and they have to understand why we're going to do it. And I think what this has shown is the benefit of having that discussion pre-job and having it in some significant detail, because our customer scores have gone up during this period, which seems quite remarkable given the sensitivity of the situation and the sensitivity of attending domestic sites. But it tells you a lot about how important it is to communicate up front and make sure customers know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and your understanding of their vulnerabilities. So I think that's taught us a lot, and there are a lot of things we're doing now that we will continue to do post this situation, because we know that it will give us a good benefit with our customers and our communities.
Yeah, Doug, and the same thing to you, really. Of course, every good business has said, we do listen to our customers, but of course, it's not always easy to do that effectively. Right now, we've all become more human than we were before, and I think people do appreciate utilities companies more than they did before when they have to come out. How do you keep that relationship going? And yes, there is an element of technology here and listening and learning and communicating, but how do you continue with that culture?
Yeah, it is something we're definitely focused on, and I agree with the point that John made about focusing on communities, and I think that's certainly how we're trying to look at it now. And we were before, but it's come to the fore more about we are part of the communities that we serve, and as a water company, clearly the focus has been on hygiene and in the early part of the crisis, hand washing and sanitation, and I think that made people think about their water supplies slightly in a different way. Perhaps they hadn't really thought about them before. And also, I think understanding the impacts on our staff, our field workers were still out during the lockdown, and identifying them as key workers, I think certainly helped on that. So, I think we have to keep focusing on those aspects, asking our customers to understand that we're part of the community that we're serving, and that our members of staff are also part of that community, and what they do really is essential, I think. And it's about, for us in the water industry, treating that water as a precious resource, which when people think about it, they do. But I think the thing that we suffer from is that quite often people just don't think about it. It's just there, and it's don't give it a second thought. So yeah, that's how we're going to keep the focus up, I think, on the community and the essential nature of it.
Excellent. Well, we have some questions through. Thanks very much for all of your points so far. I've got a few minutes now for some questions. They are really good. I've just had a quick glance. Let's see what we can make of these. Okay, question here, one line question. What do we need from leadership right now? Look, John, just briefly, I'll just throw it around. What input we've needed strong leadership, actually, haven't we? Of course, but also we've needed that real conversation internally to be strong. What good facets of leadership do we need, and what do we have?
What do we need? I think we need visibility. We need a degree of humility. We're all kind of learning our way through this, and people look to that. I think they're also looking to our leaders to kind of really listen. This is a new situation. We're all working our way through it, listening to our people, listening to our customers, listening to our stakeholders. Yeah. And I think people are really looking for direction and decision making. Give us a vision about where we're going on this.
Yeah, that sounds right. And also, a Guy, I'll throw in clarity, real clarity. We can't be left to make our own minds up on important decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, I think what this has also shown us is that we need to, show that we can trust our employees. So I'd go back to the, everybody working from home. I think there was a potentially, in our organisation, a lack of trust in terms of, the individuals are not right in front of you or in front of the team managers, therefore they can't be trusted to work at home and be as productive. And I think that was a failure in leadership prior, and it's a number of organisations I've spoken to had a very similar a similar view. So I think being able to trust employees and show that visibly and give them the opportunity to deliver a good service in a different environment has been very inspirational for me, to be perfectly honest, to see what our teams have done while we put under a lot of pressure and put in a completely alien environment. So I think I've learned a lot actually out of that one issue, and it's certainly going to change the way that I approach some of these issues in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's cross industry as well. People, we have all surprised each other at how committed we are to getting it done. That's been really, really interesting. And I saw Doug nodding there as well. Let's move on. Okay. This might be a tough one. Which technology has proved to be most enabling during COVID-19? And which was missed most? Okay, let's go for Doug. If I can just, were there any technologies that you found incredibly handy? And yes, we talked about video conferencing, that's just one. But in terms of operations, anything that you thought was extremely useful and
yeah, well, I think operationally we had remote working embedded anyway, and I think the video conferencing and Zoom as we're using it is definitely has been a real enabler throughout all of this, and I think everyone's been surprised how well that has worked. And pick up on your point from earlier, if this had happened 5 years ago, I think it would have been a very, very different scenario. And also picking up on John's point, that I think it's starting to feel a bit different now. The initial excitement's not the right word, but those first few weeks when it was different, whereas now we're in for the longer haul. So that's definitely helped overall, I think. And the remote working, our systems that we have in for the field force have worked really well. And the fact that we had that in has been really important, I think. I think we've started to try and make use a bit more of, as we talked about right earlier on, the video streaming possibly of jobs, and that's something we certainly need to look at. So for us at South East Water, I think it was the systems we had in place already that continue to work really well for the field force. Yeah. As to which ones haven't worked, none jump out at me at the moment, to be honest on that. I think what we've been surprised at is really how well things have carried on over the last few months, thinking there would be a lot more problems than there have. So yeah, it's been a great effort really so far.
Yeah, and I suppose if the technology wasn't really fit or wasn't really working, then you didn't use it. So, it's kind of to the side, really. I suppose that's the way it works. Let's carry on for a couple more minutes. We've got lots more questions coming through. Just a couple more minutes. Okay, another question around the VIN point, which I'll throw to Guy from Sabaya Carr. Have you explored using mobile and video technologies for customer communications and vice versa, getting them to report issues using that sort of technology? Guy, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so we have looked at this before. I explained in the previous question the technology we'd started to use both in terms of our connections, site visits, and our fault site visits. Yeah. So we have also asked customers, another little spin-off that we had using that video technologies. Sometimes our overhead lines get confused for BT lines, and when they come down and are grounded and we get a report from a member of the public, then we have to switch off that line, even though we're not sure it's our line, and we've got to take that critical information and to make sure that we make situations safe. So again, the video technology has been useful because we've asked that customer who's made the report to take a live video of the line that's down, and I think on 4 or 5 occasions over the last 2 months we've found that it has been a BT line. We haven't had to isolate an HV line, which could affect up to 1,500 customers for a short period. And we've avoided that inconvenience to our customers, which has all sorts of implications, especially when customers are working at home, for example. So disruption to the working day, and more importantly, health and safety, not taking away people's electricity and causing them inconvenience. So again, that video technology has definitely worked in that situation, and we probably wouldn't. One concern we've always had is having customers go too close to overhead lines and take photographs for the obvious dangers. But I think being able to trust people to be sensible and making sure you make that very clear when you call them through a video call, that technology can be used effectively and safely, more importantly.
Time for one more question. I'll just throw it to John, if that's okay, if you're able to answer this. What role do you think AI will play in driving resilience? We started off the day talking about resilience, so it's a nice way to end. Can AI and machine learning and all those good things drive the very stable foundations of utilities as we move forward?
Yes, I think there's huge opportunity in AI and machine learning, because what it enables you to do is to pull together much broader data sets, a lot more kind of awareness of what's going on in the environment, and then use that to drive various scenarios through. At the moment, they're very manual, trying to think through all the various possibilities. Using AI and machine learning to start to help you to build scenarios, to look at the possibilities, and there to plan ahead and put control and mitigation strategies in place. Yeah. I think it's a huge opportunity for you. And it's that bringing together big sets of data to understand and then predict. I think that's where the value is going to be.
Yeah, there are more questions coming through, which we don't have time for, unfortunately. There is a great question here: is there a risk of leaving people behind? Is there a risk of people being left behind through technology? Obviously, we covered that earlier on in the day in some way. But Arturo Casal Campos, thank you very much for that question, and many more as well. There's a question there from Paula Roberts. But it's time to go. That's it for this discussion. Thank you very much to our fantastic panel again, and everyone who submitted a question. It's been a whirlwind tour, hasn't it, of all things operations and infrastructure. But that brings the content side of episode 2 to a close. But of course, the networking doesn't end here. Go back to the homepage. Check your left-hand bar, a sidebar for meeting requests, or book your own meetings right there. And don't forget, if you meet with 5 other delegates, you'll be entered into the prize draw, so it's all to play for. We're back here next week for episode 3, looking at future roadmaps. Join us for our Leaders Forum on corporate strategy and sessions on regulation, innovation, and net zero too. For now, we hope you've been able to meet up with your connections and made some new ones and had a look at the sponsor hubs. You can do the same next time. Until next time, all the best. Take care. Thank you.